all. I welcome once again all of you to this another exciting session, a very important session. In fact, not only for students but also for members, because this is something that we require in our day-to-day practice. How to write effectively, how to communicate effectively, and drafting for income tax is something which is very crucial and important to all of us. So today we have none other than one of the dynamic and young income tax practicing chartered accountant. CA Nikhil Tiwari is from Ernst& Young and has really handled lot many cases. If you were to look at him, you would not believe that he would have done so many in his small little tenure as a chartered accountant. But yes, and has trained many students. He's really a role model for many income tax practicing people, and I'm sure today he will do a great job in trying to explain how to write submissions effectively and properly, and what are the small little nuances and parameters that we need to take care of. I also have today with us the Vice Chairman of WIRC, CA Vishal Doshi, with us. I would request him to please share his opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Arpit, and very good afternoon to all of you, my dear students. I hope all of you are at home and safe and healthy. At the outset, I would like to compliment Arpit for coming out with such important and interesting topics for students through webinars. And these topics are not just important during your articleship days in your practical training, but I feel they are very useful even for your examination point of view. So compliments to Arpit for the topics that he has selected. And I'm happy that we are having a blockbuster attendance on each of the days, which itself shows and proves the interesting topics and definitely the knowledgeable faculties that are there and definitely the interest of students. About the faculty, Arpit has said a lot, and I would like to thank CA Nikhil Tiwari for accepting our invitation and interacting with students and guiding them through this very important topic of drafting of income tax submissions. Students, let me just share over here that all of you must be aware that the income tax department has moved into e-assessments. That means the professionals would no longer be required to visit the income tax officers personally, and whatever submissions would be done with respect to scrutinies, with respect to rectification, with respect to appeals, or whatever it might be, everything has to be done through the internet. It is in the electronic form. And let me tell you that this topic, I would say, and Nikhilji, you would agree with me, is more important and relevant for members as it is for the students. Because see, what would happen is that till now professionals used to visit the income tax offices. They used to give a submission along with supportings, and a lot of things used to be explained verbally to the assessing officer. But now with the e-assessments, that would no longer be possible. And whatever are your thoughts, whatever you want to convince the assessing officer on the other side when you are representing your client, everything has to be done through your written submission. And this is where it becomes very important that what you write, how you write, the way you present, and even including the page-wise layout. I would say that what comes first and what comes second and what comes third, the indexing, see, all these things are of very importance now. And I am happy that we have a very knowledgeable speaker, and I would say experienced speaker, CA Nikhil Tiwari, to guide us through this drafting of income tax submissions. So once again, thank you everybody. Stay home, stay safe, and over to Arpit. Thanks, Arpit.
Thank you, Vishal bhai. Thank you for those words. And indeed, as rightly mentioned by you, in the times of online now, faceless assessment, it is our drafting that will speak and will win cases for us, and beyond anything else. So thank you, Vice Chairman of WRC. Thank you for all your support, and thank you for guiding all of us to set up this kind of sessions for students especially, and to make sure that we do training for articles irrespective of their firms, irrespective of their position, irrespective of their location, and all of them get a good exposure in terms of the best of the best training from best of the best people in the community. I would request Vikasa committee member CA no, sorry, Dania Supariwala to please introduce the speaker.
Good afternoon, friends. I would like to introduce to you all CA Nikhil Tiwari. He's a director in Tax Regulatory Services at HR Associates LLP, which is a member of EY Global based in Mumbai. He's a rank holder as a chartered accountant from 2007, and he has more than 12 years of experience in handling direct tax appeal matters before various appellate forums and litigation advisory in corporate tax, international tax, transfer pricing for several multinational and domestic clients in a wide range of industries. He has been involved in active speaker in the internal and external WIRC forums and on technical and non-technical topics. He has co-authored various articles and publications on international tax and transfer pricing. I would like to welcome you, sir. I would also like to thank our WIRC board, our vice chairman, WIRC vice chairman, Arpit sir, and all our other Vikasa members and the backend staff to facilitate all the webinars which are going on. Thank you.
May I come in? I hope I'm audible. I think I'm audible. Hello. Am I audible? Arpit, I'm audible? Yes. So before starting my session, I would like to thank the entire WIRC team, specifically Arpit and Vishal Bhai, on taking this important session. And if I remember it correctly, in my old student days, no one was there to teach us such kind of mindset. Something which we can learn is income tax, but some nitty-gritties of how to represent, how to put forth our thoughts in a written submission before the officer or even to the appellate forum is something we have never, no one has taught us. And in fact, we have burned our hand. Hello. Hello. So we have burned our hands on day in day out basis to learn these nuances, and thereafter we have come out with some kind of do's and don'ts or some kind of pointers which I can share you with my experience, which will be helpful you as a student, and in fact it will be helpful for you when you become a member, because once you become a member, then you will not have that label to make that mistake. But once you are a student, you can learn these nuances and you can apply these nuances not only in writing submission before authorities, but it will, as Vishal Bhai was explaining, it will be helpful even in writing your exam. With this note, I will start with my presentation. So I have in my presentation taken the slides, and in the slides I have taken in the various buckets on which point I'm going to take and what I'm going to speak on each of the point. But first of all, I'm going to spend much time on general points which have to be considered for the purpose of drafting of submission. Why so? Because this point will give you the base, and on the basis of this point, you can learn or you can develop the subsequent points. So with this note, I will start my first slide. See, when you say this written submission to be filed before the authorities, written submission, I had in my mind, I was in the morning was conceptualizing that how I think I should take this presentation. I thought that written submission can fall in the 4 bracket, and in those 4 brackets, each of the bracket has its own nuances. And I will just discuss each of the four brackets, and then I will go to the slides further before when I take the slide number 1. First bracket which I thought would be relevant here is
Nikhil bhai, just before you would go ahead, I would just request all the participants to please keep a paper and pen ready or your Word file ready, and please keep noting these points down because this is an absolute practical oriented session. And Nikhil bhai would also be switching in Word files as to writing, showing those really points, how to note them down, and how should a submission, ideal submission should look like. So please keep noting and stay along with the speaker so that it doesn't become only a theory lecture. I would request all of you to please keep noting and keep following the speaker so that you can really make pointers for your effective submissions. Yes, Nikhil bhai.
okay. Thank you. Okay. So as I was explaining, this written submission can be fall into 4 brackets, and each of the brackets has its own nuances. Before we go into what each of the bracket is, I will just give the brief headline of each of the bracket. First bracket under which I feel that submission has to drafted is with regards to factual data. This is your first bracket. Second bracket is with regards to your technical inputs on that factual data, which is very relevant. Third bracket is, which I thought will be relevant here, is procedural aspects in your submission. To whom you want to write this letter, what is its designation, how you want to communicate this to the officers. So that is the procedural aspect in the letter. And fourth is with regards to the formatting and other referencing part, which is also relevant. And if we all are true on this all 4 points, then I think we will meet the purpose of communicating, or one can say effective communicating our thought on a particular case to the officer. With this background, I will just, so right now I'm not going to slides, I'm just going from my notes, but it all has somewhere in my slides. When I will go through the slides, I will take this point. Right now I'm going from my notes. So in the legal submission and in the factual data, these two are the very crucial, because this is going to give the background, or which will lead to the ultimate, whether amount is taxable or not, or whether your thought process has come out well or not, will guided by these 2 factors. So we will spend much time on these 2 factors and then rest of the points. So first is factual data. So when I say factual data, what do you mean by factual data? So I was going through on the various websites and I got to know what they mean by fact. The fact is thing which is known or proved to be true. So when I say I have to lay down my factual data in my written submission, then that means I have to put down all those points which is relating to a particular transaction or particular issue, and that fact should be true. Or if someone puts it to you, you will be able to prove that yes, this is the true fact. So that is the important definition of fact. So it in a way eliminates the rule of assumption, that once you are writing a fact, you cannot assume anything, because if it is a fact, you should be able to prove it that it is a fact. Then second thought which comes to the mind, how to narrate the fact, or whether it is really necessary to go into fact once there is a particular issue which you have to debate or discuss before the officer or even before any other tax authority. So in our practical experience, we have various times come across this question, to what extent whether we should put the facts on record or whether not to put facts on record. But after all these discussions, we have come to one conclusion, that you can never write a complete submission, or you can never write a submission to impress the authority wherein your fact itself is not clear, wherein your fact itself is giving rise to 2 different views, wherein your fact itself is half fact. That means it is hiding something, or it is giving only one side of the story. Therefore, it is always advisable as a student or even as a member of this honest institution, that once we are writing any submission, we should write the fact in its entirety. We should neither hide anything, nor we should disclose anything which is half true. Now, once I say we have to give entire facts, one will ask me, what do you mean by entire facts? When I say entire facts relevant to the issue under dispute or relevant to the queries raised by this customer. You know various things about the industry or various things about the client or various things about that transaction, but you have to put across your thought process into only a relevant point which was asked by the authorities and which is necessary for you to debate further. You should not write all those facts which is not relevant here, only relevant facts. One may ask me that if you say that relevant facts, what if something I feel it is relevant, but someone say it is not relevant? So in practical uh, world, when we come across such situation, then we always take advice from team, and on a joint discussion we cannot come out with the conclusion. But one thing I can say on the straight jacket formula: if there are facts which you are not sure whether you should submit that facts, or you are in double mind because that might be relevant, might not be relevant, then as on amendment precaution, I would advise that you should put that fact as a call if you are not sure whether that is relevant. At least that will save you from not disclosing that fact before the authority. As I say, fact means there is no room for underlying assumption. You cannot assume any facts. If you are assuming, that itself leads to a conclusion that it is not a fact. Now, important thing is sometimes when we try to gather the fact from the discussion with clients or discussion with seniors or even with our partners, we come to know from oral discussion that this is the facts of the case. And on those oral discussion, when we prepare a written submission before the tax authority, sometimes there is a bound to uh, miscommunication, or sometimes there is a bound to lack of understanding what has been explained to you as a fact and what you are writing in your submission as a fact. So how we should avoid this kind of situation wherein you have got information about fact from oral call or from an oral discussion, then how you should safeguard yourself that you have correctly narrated the facts of the client. So it is always advisable when you are writing the facts and when you are not too sure about the facts, or whether even if you are sure, but you feel that this fact I have not verified, but it has been explained to me either by client or my senior. It is always advisable to take the inputs from client and always take sign off from the client. So that client on whose behalf you are writing the submission should say that yes, it is my fact. This is my fact. And on this basis, you can go ahead with the legal submission. So it is very crucial. So, you know, in practical experience, in last 3 or 4 years, we have attended uh, various routine assessments and various appellate proceedings. And when we get a time to take feedback from them, that what do you think that something is lacking from professional side, or what do you think that something we should improve upon, they have always come across and said that you need to improve upon writing of facts, or you need to improve upon explaining the entire facts in entirety, or you have to improve upon, because without jumping to the legal principle, you need to take out the fact, and that too in crisp manner. So this is the feedback, and therefore I have taken this process on the fact and what fact should we should highlight in the written submission. With this, let's come to a situation wherein you have already narrated the facts. Now what? What is the next step which is available to you, and how you should go ahead with the submission? I have taken separately discussion point on what should be the compartments in the submission and how we should keep the flow of the submission, that I will discuss later. But before that, I am just including the facts and legal portion, and then I will take that point separately. So once you come to conclusion, this is the crisp fact vis-a-vis issue or vis-a-vis transition which assessing officer or any income tax authority wants you to explain. Now, what is the next step available? See, many a times, even members or even a seasoned professionals directly jump to a conclusion and take directly to the legal principle what is available vis-a-vis particular issue and conclude the submission. In my humble opinion, or in my practical experience, that is not the appropriate way in which we should proceed with the written submission. Once you narrated the facts, it is always advisable that between facts and legal principle, you have to marry both. Just because you have narrated the facts, you have explained the legal principle, it will not scope facto apply in facts of your case. You have to put a submission in such a way that you are trying to prove a point that your facts is identical or your facts is exactly the same as it was there in the legal decision or legal principle which you want to rely upon, and therefore this principle will be applicable in facts of your case. This missing link I have seen in the many written submission filed by various professionals or students, and which is a pinching point here. Why I am saying so? This I will discuss in my next point, that is writing a technical submission in the written submission. See, when I say a technical submission in the written submission, it is very crucial and relevant. Why it is crucial? Because we are in this world wherein there is day in day out development in the income tax law. The income tax law in which you understand particular provision, the department might not understand the same particular provision in the same fashion or in the same way. And therefore, to meet those points, we have to take help of these technical aspects. Now, the technical aspects can be into two forms. Either you can go for an internal aid of help, wherein you can take the help from section itself, or you can take a help from marginal heading, or you can take a help from CBDT circular, or you can take help from memorandum explaining that particular section. This all technical submission will be internal aid, which is already there available as a part of your or external internal thing to the Income Tax Act itself, which will help you to explain or understand that provision in a greater transparency. The second aspect of the technical submission comes to a submission wherein you will take help from the external aid. That is how the judiciary is taking a position, or how judiciary is taking a particular view vis-a-vis that particular section. Now, someone will ask me at this stage, is it necessary for each and every submission that we have to go and we have to apply a technical submission, or we have to go and we have to apply a judiciary, or even on a plain reading of Income Tax Act, we can conclude this submission? So this is a very right question, and this question should be asked by every student, that why we are going to the judiciary, and why we have to take help from the case laws when we are completing our written submission. Why we cannot take position on the basis of reading of section itself and conclude a particular submission in a particular fashion? So answer to this question is very simple. And answer to this question is, if a particular provision has been interpreted by Income Tax Authority in a different manner, other than the manner in which you are understanding that provision, and that understanding of department or assessee has been tested by an independent judiciary. Therefore, in a situation where in a subsequent proceeding in your assessee's case, an income tax officer is taking that position in your assessee's case, then you can take help of judiciary or case laws other than taking help from section to say that, look, this was the provision which was interpreted in this fashion, and now this provision has been interpreted in a fashion where as has been explained by the court. So therefore, there is a blessing from the court, and that view should be applied in the facts of the case. After keeping this in mind, now next question which comes to our mind is, okay, let's assume that in a particular facts of the case, the section is not so clear, or section is ambiguous, or section is such that it leads to 2 or 3 interpretation. Obviously, we can go and take help from judiciary, that how judiciary has interpreted this section, and then we can take and write down the technical aspects of our written submissions. As I was explaining you on the facts of a case, that how you should write or how you should narrate the facts of the case, I've already said that there has to be a point of time wherein you have to marry your facts with your legal principle. And I said, when I come to the legal principle, I will say why is it so relevant. Let's assume in a situation, I will just give a practical example that you have in a facts of the case, a particular assessee has acquired a leasehold right in the land for 99 years. And assessee wanted to claim the benefit of the amount paid for that leasehold right for 99 years. And that leasehold right of 99 years is either allowable as a over a period of 99 years, or it is allowable as a depreciation on the basis of intangible assets. The issue which will come is whether it is allowable as a revenue expenses or as a depreciation. In this matter went into the litigation, and the court has taken a view that you will get benefit in some of the form, either as a revenue expenses or as a intangible. Now you are drafting a submission for your associate who has also acquired a leasehold right in a land, but that leasehold right is only for 10 years. And now you are applying the principle of that particular decision in your case, and you want to say that you want to apply that particular decision in your tax case, without saying that how difference in this fact that in that case there was a 99 years lease, in this case it is a lease of only 10 years. How difference of this fact will lead to applicability of that decision in yourself, or it will lead to a situation where court will say no, because facts is different, this legal principle is not applicable here. And therefore, just because that case law was for the purpose of legal rights, we have given certain benefit, it does not scope fact of plan your facts of the case, unless otherwise you marry your facts with the facts as applicable in that case. So it is always advisable to put this link in your written submission. If this link is there, then obviously it will be very difficult for the income tax authority to say that this case law is not applicable. And if in your submission if this link is not there, then income tax authority will have all the ammunition available to say that this case law is clearly distinguishable and it is not applicable in tax case. Hence, this legal principle will not be applicable. So, students and friends, I would advise that whenever you are making any tax submission, it is always advisable that you should put these relevant facts along with the marrying of legal principle with the fact, which is very crucial and very relevant in each and every written submission. With this, in the technical submission, I will take 2 or 3 points and then I will move to the next submission. So in this technical submission, when you are writing, it is always important to note down what kind of technical submission you want to give in a particular tax. I have seen as a student of law and even as a student of Income Tax Act that many a times when a particular chartered accountant or particular associate is making a representation before the Income Tax Authority, they bound to guided by a particular case, and they feel very happy that yes, I have found one particular case on particular subject, and therefore I should definitely incorporate that case on written submission. But that is not the case. You have to keep in mind there are judiciary discipline available, and we have to keep in mind which case law has superiority over other case law before taking help of any judiciary. Again, let's say take example, very simple example. In the facts of the case, same facts which I have explained, if a particular associate is taking that benefit with the help of a particular case of a particular traveler, without knowing that either prior to or subsequent to that case law, there is a decision from the higher court which has taken different. So the issue will arise whether that case law will hold in place or it will not hold it. So therefore, it is always advisable that when you are writing a submission, you should understand the bindingness of the various court orders, whether it is a Supreme Court order, it is a law, and if it is a High Court order of jurisdictional High Court, it is law of that state, and it will be binding on all authorities in that state. And if it is a case law pertaining to a particular tribunal, then that order will be binding on that particular jurisdiction under which tribunal is functioning. And if there is any contradicting view, when a particular High Court has taken a different view than a particular tribunal, then we need to take the help of judicial discipline, which will guide you to say that which case law will have a binding effect, and then only you can rely on this. This is very crucial. As a law student, we should not directly jump to rely on a particular case law without doing our homework, that whether that case law which I want to rely upon is still holding its field or not. If it is not holding its field, this will be regarded as case law not in existence. In law term, we say it is a Parliamentarian case law, which will not have any binding effect. With this, the next question which comes to our mind is on a particular issue, we know that there are various case laws coming into picture on day out basis. On a particular issue, there can be few case law which is in favor of this issue. On a particular issue, there can be few courts of which is against this. So, what is the duty casted upon the SSC when he is filing a written submission? Whether he is bound to give his view why the against case law is not applicable to the facts of the case, or he should simply ignore those against case law and directly jump to the favorable case law and say that because of this should be decided. See, it is always advisable, and my personal view in this would be that if you know that there are a particular court has taken a particular view which is not in your favor, you should always try to go through the case in detail, and you should try to put out important fact differentiation vis-a-vis your fact. And if you are able to put that out, you should put that in your written submission. Why I'm saying so? Because it will help you to gain the trust before the officer, as well as this will help your case when the matter goes in the litigation before the higher court. And therefore it is all legal. With this, now I will jump to the next aspect of written submission. This next aspect is also very relevant, but this comes to as a procedural aspect of written. When I say procedural aspect of written submission, I mean that what and to whom you want to write this written submission. What is his designation? Who is that person? How you should write that person's name, or how you should call that person? What is the address of that person? Who is the senior of that person? These all things are very relevant. Why it is relevant? Suppose your facts of the case, you have there is an income tax scrutiny going on, and a particular officer has raised the query on you, and while replying to that query, you have filed a written submission either online or through a physical form. And in the written submission, you have addressed this letter to a different officer, though from the same jurisdiction, but have a different charge, or even to the superior of that officer, and you have not marked copy of that letter to your officer. In this case, it would be very crucial thing that officer might not look into that submission, or officer might not get that submission on his record, and your case might be decided on ex parte. Normally, there is a principle of law that even if there is some procedural defect in your appeals or in your submission, that should not be guided, and the ultimate goal should be the justice. And if and justice should not be affected by this technical effect. But there are some officers who does not guide by this factor. They are not. They don't go by this factor. When you file this written submission to a different jurisdiction, even though that different officer might have forwarded this written submission, they will not take that submission on record because they will say this submission has never been filed by SSC on my jurisdiction. I have faced this kind of difficulty in past, wherein some senior IRS officers have not taken my submission on record because it was not addressed to that officer. And therefore, it is always advisable that when you are drafting your written submission, you should know to whom you are writing this submission, and you should keep in mind to put all his designation, address, and how to pronounce and all those things in order. Otherwise, even though your submission might be excellent on facts and legal principle, but it might not reach to the ultimate. With this, now I will come to the next part of the written submission, which is very crucial and which is very relevant when it comes to the giving benefit or giving easiness to the officer. See, we all, when we represent before the income tax authority, we are the officer of the court. When we say we are the officer of court, that means that we have to help the income tax authority to come to a correct conclusion. And in doing so, I have to put correct facts on the record, I have to put correct legal principle on the record, and I have to also help them to go through those documents which are acceptable. For this fourth quadrant of the written submission is very relevant. What is the fourth quadrant? Is formatting and referencing portion. When I am filing a written submission before the officer, what point should I keep it in mind? Suppose in the written submission which I am filing before the officer, there are various documents which I am. There are various case laws which I am preparing. how I should draft my submission. So when you are in your written submission, there are various factual documents as well as case laws. You should put numbering to all those factual documents in a sequence, and that numbering should be there in your written submission. Suppose I am referring a particular document XYZ, that document should be please refer page number this and this, wherein I have enclosed this popular tool. Same goes with the case law. But suppose if you are relying on hundreds of case law in your written submission, first of all, it is not advisable to rely on so much case law. You should rely case law which is very crisp and which is relevant to point. But suppose if there are multiple issues and the issue is very legal issue wherein you want to take help from the various case law, if on a particular interpretation you're relying on 3 or 4 case laws, it is always advisable to put only 1 or 2 case law in your submission. And this law you can put in your written submission, but you should not enclose the copy of that case, so that your submission looks crisp and your compilation should be very brief, not bulky. When I say compilation, it is always advisable when you file any written submission before the officer, along with the factual and legal documents, you should file those documents in compilation. So you all are aware that there is a timeline within which the income tax proceeding has to be initiated, completed, appeal has to be initiated. This timeline has its own period, wherein it might reach the assessment stage after 3 years, appeal stage after 5, 6 years, 7 years. So once you prepare a compilation of documents and file before the officer, those compilation will help you to preserve those documents, and this will help you if it is needed in subsequent proceedings, that is appeal. Why I'm saying so? Because this point is very crucial and relevant here. Because when you go into the appeal proceedings after your assessment is over, after you file the submission and all these things, this part, in the appeal proceeding, there is one important underlying principle that you cannot file any new document unless otherwise you satisfy certain conditions for filing a petition. So whatever documents you have filed before the lower authorities can only be submitted as a matter of right before the appeal court. So if you have submitted certain documents before the appeal authorities and you have not preserved those documents, and if it is not in the form of compilation, it will be difficult to preserve those documents. It will be very difficult for you to go in litigations and say that yes, these documents were available. And if that is not the case and you have not preserved, then you have to again go back and pain of going back and visiting the officer's file and taking back the document. So it is always advisable to compile your documents which you want to file before the lower authorities. Now, after this, the next aspect of submission which comes to is if I am relying on certain documentary evidence, and these documentary evidence are very bulky documents, how law or how income tax department wants us to submit those documents. Whether we can submit only this or relevant portion of those documents which is relevant for the query or transition in dispute, or law requires us to file all those bulky compilation of documents. Let's suppose agreement between the various parties and all those things. So in this regard, it is always advisable that once you are filing this document, and if you know that these documents are very bulky, in the written submission, you say that I am only filing a relevant document, but put a writer that I have all the documents available with us. I have not filed because they were bulky, but if your honor is wishing to look into those documents, I will submit as and when you call for. So once you put this point, it will help you to say that you have always offered to submit those documents. If assessing officer wanted to look into it, he could have asked for. If he was satisfied with the relevant portion, he has not asked. This will, I think, will be the safest approach if there are lots of documents, actual documents which you want to rely on. Let's take a situation, it is other way around, wherein SSC wants to put entire agreement on record, and assessing officer is not very lenient in taking all the agreements on record, and he is asking you to give only this document. In such a situation, you can put those documents in the file so that your documents is on record, and there is no bar and no one can stop you from submitting. But this is very important, you need to keep it. When I say and when I started this topic, I said we are officer of the court, and thereby we have to come to the situation where we have to take help from this. We have to help the assisting officer to come to the correct. Why I say so, and what is that which is relevant here when I am saying the drafting of the submission is because when we file a written submission and we know that we are aware of the entire facts of the client, we have drafted the submission nicely manner which is running in pages. We are enclosed various documents which is also running in pages. Unless otherwise, we submit those documents in compiled manner and we have put the page number for the document given cross-referencing of all the submissions submitted before the lower body. It will be very difficult for you to help the assessing officer to read all those documents and come to the correct decision on that. With this, I will just take the last point here on writing of written submission. When you are writing a written submission, what should be the flow of your written submission? And what is so relevant in this flow of written? So when we have to write any written submission, I can think that your flow should fall in the 4 brackets. First is you should give the background. What is the background of the SSC, background of the case, background of the assistant proceeding? Then you can go and give the history. And thereafter you can go on facts and legal submission, and then you can give your prayer on the particular submission. Sometimes officer when they look into the bulky submission, they ask assessor to file a concise brief or gist of their submission, so that while drafting the order or while uh, uh, interpreting your submission, assessing officer should not lose focus on any particular point. So it is always advisable as a student when we are filing a written submission and we know that written submission is running into number of pages, we should always file a concise submission for the order. And if required, chart wherein various issue has been tabulated in the chart, which is very easy for communication. With this, I will now take this my presentation, wherein I have put across various pointers which is relevant and which is relevant for various proceedings before the income tax authority. So, when you are filing a written submission, your written submission filed during the course of hearing and your oral argument during the course of hearing should marry. Suppose, let's take an example wherein your assessing officer has raised a particular query and you have given reply to that query by way of an oral argument. Then whether it is advisable and thereafter assessing officer is fine, he is agreeable to your view and he is not going to proceed further on that particular issue. So what you should do, whether it is advisable to file a written submission on that particular issue or you should stop there because he is already satisfied. So in this situation, it is always advisable that you should go ahead and file a written submission just to put your points on record, or else there could be, situation wherein in subsequent proceedings there can be reopening and all those things. So it is always advisable this particular period if there is your oral arguments, you should put that back. While drafting a submission, there are certain pointers which you should keep in mind. When you are drafting a submission, never repeat yourself, thereby meaning this in a different word. These all things we have a habit of writing in your exams or even in submission before the authority. It is not required. If you are just clear in your thought process, in your facts, in the legal principles, you should not repeat your arguments, facts, etc. This will not give a very good impression because after a certain point of time, if someone is reading your written submission, you will lose focus. You will say you are saying same thing again and again, and therefore this submission is not worth. The next point, which is basically,
sir, sorry,
yeah,
we just
sure.
got a feedback. Can you? We can't hear you actually properly.
Okay.
If you could just arrange the logistics effectively so that we can hear you, and also if you can show us a draft submission, and while you are speaking, if you can take us through that submission point by point, maybe a word file or a already made submission that you've made. That will help us also on the students also to go through what you are actually saying, because otherwise we are just listening and we are not able to comprehend and put it into place, because not everyone would have that exposure. So if you would just show us, if you can just show the one of the submissions that you have prepared right now, and you can show us on the screen. Just instead of this PPT, you can show that Word file, and we can talk about how do we start in terms of how do we address the authority, and then the subject is, especially for example the referencing, are we doing that correct? Do we have to mention the notices, and what should our subject line be to start off with? And then the point that you really mentioned about oral, how do we actually capture that in a Word file? If you can even talk about how do we draft that effectively, that will be really helpful. And can you just speak once so that we can confirm whether we can hear you appropriately?
So I have just increased the volume. Is it audible now?
It's better. Yes.
Okay. So with regards
Yes,
to your suggestion, I take your point, but right now I have not made any the same. So with the client sensitivity, I will not be able to open here. But what I will do after this call is over, I will circulate that in a draft form so that you can take send it to various students. Will be able to take help from that.
any draft submission if you would
Uh,
have, sir, on no name basis, that should
I,
also be okay.
but that I have not sanitized the draft submission, so it will not be possible to do it in such a quick time, and it
Okay.
will waste the time of everyone. So I will do that, and I will circulate it to you so that you can send it to everyone for their benefit. What I'm speaking
Okay.
will reflect in my submission.
Right.
With
Right.
this, I will continue. So then next portion of submission should be that when you are making a particular submission, submission has a different leg of argument. So for a particular issue to be decided in your favor, you can have a leg of argument. It is always advisable to take all the leg of arguments separately so that no one is confused that you are taking whether two different arguments or you're taking a one particular argument. So your legal argument or your different leg of argument should have a distinct head. And as I said in my briefing note when I was starting this presentation, that you should be very specific in the query case. You should not write all the facts which is not relevant. You should focus on the relevant thing which is there. So with this, the issue will be whether if you have the officer has raised the various queries to you, and at present you are not ready with all the queries, but you are ready with some of the queries, and some of the queries you are not ready. It is advisable that first of all you should file all your submission at one go. If it is not possible to do various queries raised by the officer, you can find a different submission. But in the submission, you should mention that I have only replied part and part I will reply, so that assessing officer should not understood it in a manner that you have only this much to say in entire. So this pointers I think I have already taken in my brief thing. Now with this, I will go to the specific section under which your proceedings are pending before the officer, and under which you want to file a written submission, and what thing you should keep in mind. Let's take up a situation where you want to file a written submission before the officer, and that proceeding is proceeding under section 143, wherein the assessment is going on. See, it is always advisable when you have to file a written submission. Before that, if your case is selected for scrutiny, or even before that, once you file a written submission, whatever position, disputable position you're taking, you should file a letter to the assessing officer to explain, even if your case is not selected for scrutiny, to explain your position in a brief, so that assessing officer at a subsequent stage should not come and say that you should not disclose these facts on your own. And on submission of notice, you have disclosed these facts, and there is some concealment issue, and on which you can review. It is always advisable to disclose your disputable claim before the officer by way of a letter, even if your case is not selected. Thereafter, once your case is selected for scrutiny, your submission will flow in various stages. The first stage will be supplying of various documents to the office. He might ask you to give me balance sheet, give me agreement, give me creditors transaction, give me debtors transaction, and all those things. And you have to compile the data and give the data. This will be the stage where you will compile all the data. At this stage, I don't think so there is any requirement of submitting any legal action. And the submission which will only have closing this data and closing this data. Thereafter, after going through the data, assessing officer will come to a situation wherein he will have a practical query, and he want to know what legal position or what position you have taken on that particular transaction return of income. And he might raise a show to you to explain why the particular transaction is taken in particular fashion and why not in a different fashion. That is the stage wherein your legal submission along with facts, which I was narrating earlier, will come, and you have to support facts of it. With this, I will now go to the next situation when your case is selected for reopening. So, reopening assessment in the Act, there are various safeguards available to the SSC against the reopening process. In those safeguards, it's like if it is within 4 years, there are different safeguards. If it is beyond 4 years, there are different safeguards. whether there is any tangible material available, whether there is any failure and part of process will disclose the fact. Why I am narrating this safeguard? Because once the case is selected for reopening proceeding, first you need to satisfy yourself that this safeguard is there, is going to help you or is not going to help you. If it is going to help you, at first available opportunity in the form of written submission, you have to put those across to the executive officer that this way is not valid because of this safeguard available in the Income Tax Act. So in the reopening, your flow of the submission will be always that first you have to say that what has happened in the original system, if there was any. Thereafter, you have to hit upon the reasons for reopening, which was initiated by the assessing officer. And thereafter, you have to come with your factual and legal submission on the facts of the particular case. Sometimes, the clients ask us if a particular transaction on which assessing officer wants to raise a query, and those documents were not there on record before the lower court is in the original assessment proceedings. And those documents we first time rely upon in the assessment proceedings before the assessing officer, and whether that can be included as a part of written submission. The answer to that question would be because this is a separate proceeding and this is assessment proceedings or extension of assessment proceedings. You can rely on any documents, even if that document is not on record in the assessment proceedings, to help your case or to make your case on merits. With that, I will now go to the next topic, which is what should be the point we should keep in mind when the case is selected for search and survey, and thereafter there is a assessment proceedings going on. So there is no new point other than point which I have discussed earlier. But here in the search and survey, again, this has its own nuances. This has its various safeguards available. That on what kind of issue can make addition. So you have to go through the provisions and say if that particular provision is going to protect you, you should take help of that as draft. See why I am asking you to put all those things at the first available opportunity and give that submission before the officer itself. Because in the Income Tax Act there are various sections. One being section 292B, which prohibits you to take up objection in a subsequent stage if you are not taking.
Sorry, Nikhil sir. Nikhil sir, sorry to interrupt. You're not audible. If you want, you can switch off your webcam if the data is not supporting. No, you're not. No, it's all disturbed actually. So if you can switch off the webcam. If you want, you can switch off the webcam.
Am I audible now?
You can switch off the webcam if you want the video, so that data consumption is less and you can effectively speak more, and you can use your slide to share.
Okay.
Just open your presentation.
So am I better now?
Yeah, it's better. Just open up the presentation once so that we are all on the same slideshow. Resume slideshow.
Yes, I opened it. It's on my screen.
Perfect. And now if you can just speak, so I'll let you know if at all you're if you're breaking in, then I'll let you know. Please
sure.
Speak some. Yeah.
Okay. So I was explaining that what is the relevance of taking an objection on a particular issue before the officer, that is the first available opportunity, because there are some certain sections in the Income Tax Act which prohibits you to take that objection in subsequent proceedings, like section 292B. Suppose in a particular issue, if you find that the notice issued by officer is invalid notice or time barring notice, then you have to take that objection before the officer itself. If you're not able to take that objection there, then there is a prohibition and you cannot take that objection in the appeal. So therefore, it is always advisable that.
So you're still breaking actually. There's no clear audio. You're still breaking.
Okay. I don't know how can I.
If you can change your headphones, maybe.
It will take time to change the headphone. Is it not clear now?
You keep on breaking in between. That is the point, and so there's no continuation.
Okay. Let me change my position. This should help. Is it fine now?
Yeah,
तिवारी
better.
सर आपका ये हेडफोन में ब्रेक है क्या सर? कुछ ब्रेक है क्या तिवारी सर? हेडफोन?
नहीं, headphone. There is no problem in the headphone. Might be
Can you
problem
use
with
the
the
earphone?
internet.
Can you use the earphone and the mic in that? You can change the earphones and we can use the mic in that headphones or earphones, whatever you have.
सर आप डायरेक्ट हेडफोन निकाल दीजिए ना सर, डायरेक्ट बोलिए फिर।
हाँ,
Okay,
डायरेक्ट बोलिए निकाल दीजिए हेडफोन।
नहीं, अभी audible है। I have because I changed the position. So is it audible now?
sir, ऐसे आ रहा है, but you know what is happening is when you're speaking continuously, then you break in between.
Okay, let's see if it is breaking, then we will change this time because I have changed my position and it is near to Wi-Fi. I hope it will come.
So now see again the entire sentence that you've said, no, we have not been able to hear it effectively.
Okay, so once let me try with you always.
Maybe just change the voice input, no?
Hello.
Yeah, better.
यस सर, ओके।
Please continue.
Hello.
Perfect.
हमने है
Perfect.
ना उसमें ओके कुछ नहीं सर, जो सामने आया उसमें ओके ऑप्शन है, उसमें ओके करिए।
Is it audible now?
Yes.
यस सर, यस सर।
Okay, so then I will proceed with this.
Perfect.
So with this, we will come to next proceedings, wherein drafting a particular submission on a penalty proceedings. Why I have taken this all written submission proceeding wise? Because it is very relevant. Because each proceedings will have its own nitty-gritties, which will have its own safeguards, which will have its own protection available, and therefore you have to draft your submission accordingly. When I say penalty proceedings, in a penalty proceedings, see, if you on a particular issue there is a penalty levied, there will be a reason, basis for why penalty is levied, and thereafter that basis has been resulted into levy of penalty, and that penalty will be ultimately on a particular addition on merits of the case or for certain failure on part of the SSC to submit documents or something like that. So you have to draft your submission in this fashion. You have to counter the penalty order in these three stages, wherein first you have to charge the basis on whether that basis itself is right or wrong. Your submission should start with that. This all will after you put all correct facts on record. Second will be you have to then challenge the ultimate levy of penalty, on what ground he has levied the penalty after the basis on which it was initiated, whether there is matching or disparity in both, or whether they are both are in the same lines, but whether there was no such default from your side. And thereafter on third, you have to give your submission on merits of the case as well. Many times people ask me that when we are filing a written submission before the penalty proceedings, do we have to give our written submission even on merits of the case? So herein it is very relevant and important for all of us to know that though penalty proceedings and income tax assessment proceedings are different, but penalty proceedings is an extension wherein your penalty is levied basis the assessment proceedings. In the penalty proceedings, courts have said that you can give your submission on merits of the case as well. And even though there will be a situation wherein on the same facts or on the same merits of the case, there will be addition under normal proceedings, but officer might say that no, in these facts of the case, penalty is not justifiable and I am deleting the penalty. So all the three has its own relevance, and these three should have been put on record accordingly. Thereafter, the proceedings comes is of TDS proceedings. See, TDS proceedings right now, which we see has two different limbs. One is with regards to 200A, which is similar to 143(1) proceedings, wherein if there is a short deduction, one system generated note will come, or even if a delay in filing of delay in payment of TDS, there will be one system generated note will come, and this note will say that this much of demand is pending against you. See, when you are writing this, when you want to file appeal or file rectification against this proceedings, you have to be very sure on what ground this issue has been raised. So if this kind of proceeding is there, it is always required from the assessee to go and take the justification report from the assessing officer to know that what is your exact default, and thereafter you can give your submission whether that default is correct or not, and whether that default lead to any payment of tax or not. Thereafter, the penalty proceeding comes with regards to 201, 195 or 197 proceedings. So these proceedings are specific proceedings wherein you want to deny your liability to deduct tax, and for that, whatever things I have stated while discussing 143.3, that is regular assessment, your submission should be drafted on the similar lines, wherein you have to give facts of the case, you have to give legal principle, you have to marry those legal principle with the facts of the case, and then there should be background and all those things as we discussed earlier. With this, we will come to the next important chapter of the assessment, and we should know that what documents is required and relevant when you are dealing with the transfer pricing officer, and how you should draft your written submission when you are dealing with the transfer pricing officer. See, transfer pricing proceeding is a part of assessment proceedings, but it is being done by a different officer, which is a transfer pricing officer. This proceeding is as similar to assessment proceedings, but this is only to know that whether your transaction with your various related parties situated outside India or within India after 2012 on a specified transaction is at arm's length principle or not. So the purpose of this proceedings is this, and after keeping that principle in mind, we should give documents. Again, here there will be two stages of submitting documents. Stage one would be wherein you have to submit all the factual documents before the officer. On the basis of those factual documents, now one will ask, what will be the factual documents here? The basic documents here would be the transfer pricing study report and transfer pricing audit report. These two reports are the basic document along with your return, computation, and your financials. On the basis of these documents, officer will raise certain query on or raise certain show cause on a particular transaction, whether that is on at arm's length or not. Then the stage will come wherein you have to justify that particular transaction is at arm's length or not. And then you have to follow the same principle as we have narrated while going for the assessment proceedings, that you have to explain the facts, you have to explain the transaction, then you have to go with the legal principle and support both with each other. With this, now I will come to specifically points which is advisable to do when you are doing the or you are writing a submission before lower authorities, and which you should avoid when you are writing a written submission before lower authorities. First will be always seeking approval from client before filing of submission. When I was discussing the facts, and I said that you all should always take approval from clients while dealing with the facts, this issue will come wherein you have drafted this submission, you have married the facts with a particular legal provision, and you have drafted a legal provision, and you have concluded your submission, and you have taken the approval of client only on the facts and not on the illegal principle, and you have submitted. Subsequently, when you give the copy of submission to the client, and client comes to know that this particular decision is not applicable to their case, the analogy drafted by you or analogy prepared by you is not correct because they are into different business model, we are into different business model. This all situations practically happens. So though I have said that facts, so you have to take approval from client anyhow. Without taking approval from client, you should not submit any facts to the authorities. But it is always advisable and it is always important to take approval of client on any of the legal principle which you want to apply on a particular facts of the case. Now the issue comes on whose letterhead you should file the documents before the authority. See, we as a chartered accountant, when we go and represent before the income tax authorities, we are representing on behalf of our client. We are having a authorization by client to represent their case before the income tax authority. Though we can file their submission on our letterhead, but it is always a advisable situation when the facts are not so clear, and when the facts are such that it may lead to a situation that someone say that this fact is not correct. Always take such kind of submission on client's letterhead. Let them put and give their signature that yes, this fact is correct, this is properly drafted, and I am signing this document that yes, this has come out very well. So see, though we can file this kind of document on a chartered accountant's letterhead, but it is always advisable when you are filing a written submission before the authority, and when you are not sure about fact, you should take those documents after client's approval and if required on a client's letterhead. See, this is important point because we have seen practically that when we represent the client, we only ask certain details from the client, and thereafter everything is done from our end without taking client in confidence. This will lead to a situation wherein client might come back to us and say that this is not correct. Institute might come back to us and say that no, you have not followed the professional due diligence, and how can you file certain kind of submission without taking client in confidence. Even court can come back to you and say that whatever you have submitted is incorrect, and whatever you have submitted is not after taking client in confidence, is therefore the chartered accountant is guilty, and some proceedings might be initiated against chartered accountant. So this is very crucial in this practical world, wherein there is different facet of nuances on a particular transaction. You should always take and prefer to take submission on client's letterhead only. With this, I will go to the next point, which is under do. Is, as I was explaining on the legal principle, if on a particular transaction there is a decision of a higher court, whether judicial high court or a Supreme Court, even though it might be 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, but the facts in that case and legal principle in that case is applicable in facts in your case, it is not advisable to multiply your proposition by taking help from different decisions. That one decision itself will be sufficient, and your submission will be will have a greater weightage only on the basis of that decision. Nowadays we have seen that when a student draft a submission, they feel excited when they come to a recent case law, even though that case law might be of a tribunal in 2020, but they don't go and look at the higher authority which has pronounced various years back on a particular issue, and they don't go such kind of case laws. So it is always advisable that you should, when you are doing any legal research, put the cases from the higher authorities first, and if required, then only go for lower authorities, and that too latest one. This point in do's last point is with regards to challenging the validity of and legal ground. See, when you are drafting a written submission before the tax authorities, and you know that your proceedings is time barred, you know that your notice is time barred, you know that your proceeding initiated is without any ground, then all those points, legal points, you should put your written submission at appropriate stage in merits of the case, so that whenever you want to challenge such ground before the higher authorities should not say that you are coming first time before me without taking this kind of appropriate written submission or ground before the lower authorities. So when any notice is issued to you by a officer, and when you are drafting a submission, first and foremost thing what you should do is prepare a checklist. In that checklist, you have to take down whether the notice is within time limit, whether the proceeding is within time limit, whether the assessing officer has jurisdiction to issue this notice, whether the assessing officer has taken the approval from the higher authority if required on particular case, and whether that officer has taken the approval of higher authority. If all those checklists is ticked, then you will not miss this point. And if there is some certain lacuna, then this will be appropriate stage for you to take that point in your written submission. So directly jump into the particular case on merits. You should do all your homework before coming into that stage. With this, I will now go and take the next issue. What are the things we should avoid when you are filing a written submission? I think I have taken these points when I was discussing a particular quadrant of written submission, but again I will, for the sake of repetition, at brief will discuss this. So unnecessary arguments and narration should be avoided. What do you mean by unnecessary argument or narration? So once you explain the facts and given your legal proposition in brief, you should not drag that legal proposition to a different level, or you should not drag unnecessarily and bring out something or different from that legal proposition. So your submission, written submission, should be crisp and to the point, and without unnecessarily arguments which is not relevant at this stage. Repetition of issue and explanation, as I said, this is clear cut no, because whenever we have a forum wherein we take inputs from the officers, they say a chartered accountant has a habit of writing and writing. They goes on and goes on. They don't know where to stop. And this is one of the very important principle when you write a written submission. You should know from where to start, but you should also know that where you have to end this. It should not be so lengthy that for a small issue you are giving a submission on hundreds of pages. So this is an art which you should learn and which you should take into account, and this will obviously come with the experience. But this you should be conscious about this fact when you are writing submission, and that consciousness will help you to draft your submission in a greater manner, and this point will be taken care. As I again said, too many case laws is not required. CRISP will help you, and that too from higher court. Now, this next point is very crucial and very relevant. See, when we are writing a submission on behalf of client to the officer who is working on behalf of government, we should be very categorical of what we are writing in the written submission. There is no personal fight going on between you and the officer. This is a fight of principle, and you should, with all honesty, with all due diligence, with all professionalism, you should not make any such comment which is going to hurt his sentiments or which is going to hurt the sentiment of department. The purpose is not that. Purpose is to win the case with the help of excellent written submission, and not to make AO honestly aggressive by making certain comments against him. Even though he might not be reasonable, but you should write a submission in such a manner that you are not crossing that boundary, and there is that professionalism is maintained by all the chartered accountants. So this is very crucial, because many times we see that once you are very confident on a particular issue and you make a written submission before the officer, but officer is not with you, you go and you become very aggressive in your talking as well as in your written submission. You should always avoid that. There is a forum available. You will get a right to file appeal. There is a opportunity available. You should not unnecessarily make any remarks or any allegation against the officer. This will not going to help you, and definitely not going to help you to win the case before the officer. Now, next important point, as I was discussing when I was discussing fact, never disclose any confidential information without approval of client in the submission. I said once you take the approval of client, this everything is taken care of. But if you don't take the approval of client, there will be various such issues which will pop up, and you will not have any answer, and client might be in situation to even sue you that you have not presented, you have not applied your professional due diligence, and you have taken something which you should not have done. So this point is again under the umbrella of entire point wherein you have to take the approval of client, and so that facts is and legal principle has been approved by the client when you are submitting before the officer. With this, I will move to the next slide. When you represent before the income tax authorities, the representation is, as we were earlier discussing, in this era of e-assessment, there will be faceless assessments. So first and foremost is your written submission. If your written submission is up to the mark, then no second point is needed. However, in a situation where you are physically representing before the income tax authorities, what should be the point you should keep in mind other than filing a written submission, which we have already discussed? These are the points which you should take care while representation is made before the income tax authorities. See, these are the points under do's. You have to be courteous. You have to give respect to the chair. He is sitting on a chair on behalf of department. You have to give due respect to him. You cannot be in a position to say that no, I know everything, you're not aware of legal principle and all those things. This approach will not help you. Be fair. When we say be fair, this is a very this word is of very wide amplitude. See, in a particular situation when you know that facts of your client's case is weak, or your client has taken an undue advantage by taking a particular position in the return of income, which otherwise you feel that is not correct. In such a situation, though you want to fight that case on merits of the case and you want to fight that in higher court, you have to be fair before the authorities. When I say fair, I am not saying you should go and concede, but I am saying that you should put all the nuances of that before the officer. Let him take the call. You will get the opportunity to go in appeal, but you should not hide anything, and you should not give any impression that you are not giving a fair approach in the entire proceedings. Again, be reasonable and brief. I have already explained in the written submission. Same goes with the oral submission as well. When you are representing, you cannot go on and go on. You have to have habit of listening. You cannot just speak. You should know what is his mindset, what he is thinking, what is his point put across. if you are aware of all those things and you listen to that properly, then you can put your submission in brief rather than just going on. Again, avoid overzealousness, which I think I have already taken. Due respect to the authorities, dress appropriately. See, this the dress appropriately portion is not very relevant here, but I would through this forum would like to tell all the students, see, in this world this is very relevant. Not before the officer, but if you go in subsequent stage, appellate stage, this will be taken at very serious level. So avoid taking this in a light manner. Even if you are a student, follow a proper dress code principle. If anyone wants to know what kind of dress code principle you should follow, please take help from the income tax appellate tribunal rules, which say what kind of dress code you follow when you go to the court. Follow that same dress code when you go to the officers. This will help you to, you know, gain some confidence. Even officer sitting on the chair will have certain confidence in you. So don't take this lightly. This is very important and very relevant. Assist the authorities by highlighting this. I have already discussed. You have to be fair. You have to be very reasonable. Now I will discuss certain don'ts point, which is also relevant here, because when we get the power of attorney from the client expect us to do certain work which client is not able to do it. But that scope is very limited. You have to go and represent before the authorities. But at the same point of time, the thing which is supposed to be done by client and on which when you have not got any authority, you should not do it. Like if any documents, notice or communication department wants to send it to client and you went before the officer and you want to collect it, you should never do that. Because first of all, that will not be within your authority. And second, even if it is within your authority, the proper channel should be communicated to client, and you should courteously say that this is not within my domain. Please kindly send this to the client directly. Second is when we are saying that how we should represent and how we should draft our written submission, but take a situation that wherein you are already aware of the facts, but you are taking too much of time in drafting the submission and you are taking unnecessary adjournment before the officer because your submission is not ready. This will always a situation wherein officer will have all the amenities available, wherein he can levy a penalty, he can dispose your case ex parte and raise a demand and all those things. It is always advisable that in a situation wherein you have to represent before the officer, you have to do your task within a timely manner so that this situation can be avoided. Lose temper, just keep calm. This goes without saying. You are before the authority, you have to follow this. Be in a haste, don't be in a haste, go slow and respectfully. So this you will learn when you start representing, and over a period of time you will learn this, that the entire assessment proceeding is not only about telling officer but taking his points and then replying to his point. So you have to be slow, understand, respectful. With this point, I will take the last important point on the power of attorney. This is very relevant and very crucial. As a law student, we all should, and even as a student of this field, income tax, we all should know that what is the role of power of attorney in representation before the income tax authorities. Can you go and represent before the authorities without having a power of attorney? Can you go and file a written submission before the authorities on your letterhead without having a power of attorney? Can you as a student has any right to go and represent or go and file a written submission on your signature? This all is a very relevant and important point, and we should all understand that the right given under the power of attorney by a client will be a very specific right, and that right has to be exercised by only those person to whom that right is given, and that right normally is given to chartered accountant. And as a student or as an intern, you don't have such right, and you should not step into the shoes of chartered accountant to file submission on your signature or represent department before the department on behalf of CA. You can company, you can learn, but you should always keep these factors in mind. One more important factor, whenever you are representing before the authorities, always understand that you should have a valid original power of attorney before you enter the door. If you don't have that power of attorney, you cannot even enter the door on behalf of your client. You can go in your personal capacity, but not on behalf of your client. This is very crucial and very relevant. Many times we take these things for granted, and therein the impression is set that yes, he is not prepared, he has just come like that, he has not taken and he has not followed the entire protocol, and principle. Therefore, it is always advisable that for each proceeding before the officer, so suppose for a particular assessment there are 3 or 4 proceedings going on, you should have 4 power of attorney for each proceedings. That power of attorney should be submitted to officer so that it can goes in the respective files and your authority is taken on record. With this, I will just take the certain don'ts points while executing the power of attorney. Never execute the power of attorney on client's letterhead because this is a legal document. It should not be on client's letterhead. Always file an original copy of power of attorney. Don't put Xerox copy. And power of attorney is specific to an accountant and chartered accountant. It is not for advocates. Advocates have a different form altogether, which is called as Wakalatnama. So don't put name of any advocate. Suppose one advocate is working, he wants to represent in the capacity of advocate, he is doing articleship here, but you should not put the name of advocate in power of attorney because that per se will not be a valid power of attorney. With this, I think I have sufficiently covered all the points, and if time permits, I can take one last bullet on this thing subject to Arpit and team.
Yes, please go ahead. We have got around 10 more minutes.
Okay.
And
So I will
we
just
can
take
take some
this last.
questions.
Yes, sure, sir. So I will just take this last bullet, and this is also very crucial bullet. See, when we are filing a written submission along with documents, when I say we have to be fair, we have to be fair. There is no other option available. But at the same point of time, we have to be judicially cautious. If assessing officer has raised query on X, you should be knowing that I have to submit documents only on X. Why should I submit documents on Y? He has not raised any query. This is not something that you are not fair. This is something you have to strategically decide what documents is relevant for ground number X, and I am submitting only those documents. Second, when we are filing a written submission, there has to be, I said, compilation. This compilation is normally in our field known as paper book. You should prepare a paper book in such a manner that this should have an index. In index, the first line item will be your written submission from page number 1 to 20. The second line item will be all the factual documents which you are going to rely upon in your written submission. It will be specifically coming in the index. Ground number on that too, it has to be arranged in ground wise. Suppose on 3 or 4 issues you are making a written submission. On each issue, what kind of factual documents you are submitting should come on index. What kind of legal documents you are submitting should come on index and has to be serially numbered. So that entire document will start from number 1 and will go on till end. See, when I say in our earlier portion that I have to assist the officer while assisting, in the written submission we might have relied on various case laws, but when you are submitting the copy of case law, you should highlight the relevant portion so that he should know which portion I have to read. Otherwise, he will lost, and this will not going to help, or this is not going to be a look at favorable. He will be confused and he will not give any relief to you on that particular issue. Now, what are the don'ts point when you are drafting a paper book or filing a compilation before the officers? Paper book should never be without index. Otherwise, your entire proceedings will be only for searching documents. If you say I want to rely on agreement ABCD and that agreement might be on certain page, you have not kept indexing, you have not done numbering, this will be a situation wherein you will be only searching for documents in the entire proceeding. This will not going to help. You will lose your first impression before the officer. When the officer at the time of assessment has gathered certain information, that information is gathered through various notices issued, and thereafter you file your submission on legal aspects of that information. If suppose particular situation you have given all the documents, and on the basis of documents assessing officer has raised certain query, now on that query you want to reply and you want to rely upon certain new documents. This is the opportunity and stage wherein you will file the written submission, includes that new documents even though that was not given at the time of submission of data. This will going to help you. Even though assessing officer might say that, okay, I have to go through the documents, come after 5 days, that's fine. But submit those documents at first available opportunity whenever you come to know that this document is relevant for my issue under appeal. See, one thing is very important. Nowadays, we know that there is an era of e-assessment. All documents has to be submitted online. This point will be relevant for physical as well as online thing. See, suppose I want to file certain documents. That documents I have taken scan in such a fashion that it is not legible properly. Or I have taken a scan of half documents I have not taken a scan. This all situation should be avoided. Before sending any document or before submitting any papers before the authority, you should thoroughly check whether these documents are readable and whether these copies are legible copies. The last point which I already discussed, if paper books are getting bulky, only keep relevant document with the option open that I want to submit. I am submitting the relevant portion, and if your honor is wishing to ask for entire documents, I will be free and I will submit all the documents. But just to avoid bulkiness, I have submitted the relevant documents. So this will help and this will reduce the bulky paper book and all these things. So with this, I think I have sufficiently covered what point you should take in mind while completing the written submission. And in brief, I have also discussed what should be the pointers which you should keep in mind while discussing or while facing the tax authorities. If anyone has any specific questions or something like that, I will be happy to discuss the same.
Right. Thank you. That was quite a session and uh, quite a lot of insights in terms of what all should be done and should not be done effectively while doing the submissions. I think we'll have one more round of how do we draft appeals also very effectively, and so that that will cumulatively help a lot of students here. We got some questions, and I'll put them to you, Nikhil, and maybe you can respond to them. Yeah.
Sure. So I
Right.
have just got slides of questions. If I
No,
can read and
I'll put it up to you. I'll read it for you, and you can then reply.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
The first is there are many case laws on employer contribution to PF ESIC. There are many intimation coming in case payment of PF after the due date given in the respective law, but before due date of ITR filing. How to fight against such cases? Please guide us. I think 36(1) and 43(b) rip-off is what they're talking about. So, do you have any insight on this?
Correct. Sure. So see, this question is very relevant because after every 3 years we get some certain or other kind of decision which negate or take a different view than the earlier position. As of now, in Bombay High Court has taken a view in favor of the SSC for employer employee both contribution, even if it is submitted before due date of filing return of income, it will be allowable as deduction. So my suggestion to you all would be always look where your client is situated, go for their judicial high court decision and rely on that, and this will help you. So in Bombay, this position is favorable. There are various other high courts has taken a view after considering the Supreme Court decision of Along, which has given a guidelines, and they have taken a view this is allowable if it is paid before filing of due date of return of income. So you should do that, and thereafter putting your facts, you should put legal submission.
Great.
Over to you.
So in Mumbai, you're saying there's a Bombay High Court decision which says PF after due date that is 15th, but before date of ITR filing, and hence that would be allowed as a deduction, right? You
Correct.
remember the case law or any particular thing?
So I don't remember the name exactly, but
Okay.
I will tell you in a few minutes when we will discuss other.
Sure, no problem. Second, if you have any practical case study, then please show us on submission. Okay, that is what we've got a feedback. So maybe if you could share share some submissions, some draft submissions, we'll host them on our WRC website. So all of these people can download under student section. So you can email it to us, Nikhil, and some of the sample ideal case studies submissions, so that these people can refer to, be it seeking deferment, be it responding back, be it for 143(1), be it for whatever appeals may be.
Sure.
Right, that will help.
So Arpit, on first question, there are two Bombay High Courts which I can see. First is Hindustan Organic Chemicals, which was in 2014, and again Gatke Patil Transport, again Bombay High Court in 2014. They have considered the Supreme Court and said that if you pay before the due date of filing return of income, you will get that deduction.
Excellent. There you have the dictionary of case laws. Yes, it's in the mind of Nikhil. So then going to the next question. So for giving reference of any case law in the submission, how to study or analyze the case law? There are several case laws available for a particular section. how to identify and present it in the submission. Kindly explain. Wow, this is a topic in itself, I think. Yeah.
I was about to say that only, Arpit. So
Yeah.
see, the legal research, I have already taken in my office 2 presentation on legal research. What are the forums available and
Okay.
how to do legal research. But just to give answer to this question, you should know what are the key thing you are searching. And if you put that keywords in the search, you will get the result. And again, there is 2 approach when you want to remember a case law. One is proactive and second is post-active. When we say proactive, you should, as a student of law, should read day in day out. In your mind, that case law will register somewhere or other. And when you face that client's case, you will remember, oh, I have read somewhere there is a case law of this thing. Second is post facto, wherein you see the facts, see the client situation, and you will try to searching for this. So in pre-facto case, you will be in better position. In post-facto case, you have to depend on all the website and all those things.
Very relevant. So I think we can do a session on if if there's a really a question and if legal research is something that you've already presented somewhere. So what we can do is we can arrange a session here based on legal research and how to make submissions using case laws. I think that would be really helpful for all the students and especially members also if they are interested. So we'll take a feedback on that and we'll arrange a session on that. Also,
Sure,
what
sure.
is
It will be my
important to
pleasure.
note, yeah, also what is important to note is not everyone would have the access to the database of case laws. So probably most of them rely on Google and Tax Sutras and Tax Guru and all of this. So again, that will be a very interesting thing. How do we highlight that and make it relevant for people not having access to the database, or else if that is also to be done, how can that be done effectively?
Sure.
Right. Can you repeat the session once again, as first 1 hour we are not able to hear you proper, as you also understand how it's important in practice. So for betterment of all, please upload on YouTube or one more webinar on this subject. All right, taken. That's for us. Nikhil bhai, I think you'll have to work on your logistics here.
Sure, sure.
Well taken feedback, and we'll try and see if we could arrange another session on. Anyways, I have proposed that we do a session on submission, how to draft appeals. Probably we'll cover the session what Nikhil bhai mentioned in that as well. Now, next question is, can the initiation of penalty proceedings be challenged in appeal with CIT appeals, not waiting for order of penalty? Oh,
See,
that's
Arpit, this question is a very valid question, I would say, because
okay.
in practically all the chartered accountants, when they file appeal on merits of the case, they take up the ground on initiation of penalty proceedings. When they take up the ground on initiation of penalty proceedings in the appellate forum, the answer to that ground comes that this is premature ground, because just there is an initiation, that initiation will not lead to levy of penalty, and just because he is initiated, you are not aggrieved by that initiation, so there is no ground. But when I was referring to the penalty thing, and I said that when there is a penalty proceeding going on, you should challenge initiation as well. What I was mentioning that, so if suppose department has initiated on ground X and levied a penalty on ground Y, then in the penalty proceeding or in the appellate proceeding, you can say that he is not clear on what he wants to levy penalty. That you should challenge. So my mind was that this, though we take the appeal, but this is premature. Only on initiation of penalty there cannot be any appeal.
Okay. So on what grounds is the penalty being sought to levy is what we can challenge. Is that your submission,
Correct.
right?
Just to give examples, if penalty is initiated on inaccurate particulars and levied on
Right.
ultimate concealment of income. So he is not clear whether he wants to levy it on incorrect or particulars of income. So therefore, in such a situation, you can challenge that in ground in the appellate forum, and there are a host of cases wherein they have given relief on this situation.
Yes, mostly we see that these penalty proceedings by assessing officers are very, not thought
Mechanical.
into very, yeah, they're very mechanical and as a very knee-jerk reaction that they do it. So probably that exposes it to a lot of loopholes, and that is what Nikhil is mentioning that we should exploit while making a CIT appeal. Right. Next is, should we challenge merits of issuance of SCN? Technical point, for example, no approval of immediate boss where the requirement is mandatory requirement of statute. Show cause notice.
See, this point is very crucial point, and in fact, if I can give one example, Bombay High Court in in the case of VSNL, in so many words, while discussing the case of reopening, has held that if for reopening you wanted to take approval of your senior officer, say suppose additional commissioner, you have taken the approval of senior to senior, main boss, say commissioner, then also it is not correct. Your entire proceeding will be quashed. So it is very crucial and relevant to always see who has issued your show cause notice, whether he has taken the approval, that too from the specified person as specified in the act. Just because he has gone to the ultimate boss and not taken the permission from the person whose name mentioned in the act, that will also not suffice the purpose. So you should be very aware of this kind of nuances, and whenever there is any notice, you should keep this in mind and take that submission in the written submission before a officer.
Oh, that's quite interesting and quite an. No one thought that boss's boss, if he's approving, that can also be subject to be, making the assessment invalid. It's quite a thing, yeah.
Logic of Bombay High Court is very simple. You cannot sit upon the act. Act is saying additional commissioner, so it is additional commissioner. You cannot go to the commissioner.
Oh. So in letter and word of the law.
Correct.
Okay, next is while drafting submission on client's letterhead, do we have to submit MRL?
What is MRL?
Management representation, that is POA maybe.
So if
MRL is management representation letter, but I think in our sense we'll call it power of attorney.
Okay, so when we are submitting the submission on client's letterhead, and you are going physically representing that client, then obviously you will require power of attorney. But suppose client, you have helped the client to prepare the submission, client is filing written submission on his letterhead, and client personally only going and representing before the officer, then I don't think so your any authority is required. In fact, the person employee of the client who is going to represent, he would be required some kind of authority letter to go and represent before the officer.
No, so I think the question, so they're trying to say the initial submission that we are making, and if it is on client submission, but can we go on behalf of the client and submit it and attend the hearings also? Do we need a POA for that? Although it is coming on the client's letterhead.
Sure. So if you're submitting on client's letterhead and it is submitting only on Tapal without any discussion with the officer, then I don't think that there is an authority required.
So therefore, if you are having a hearing, then make sure that you are having a POA.
Correct. So if you want to enter the court, this is your key.
Okay. Next question is, when POA given, why on letterhead of client? CA is agent of client in the light of POA. No, we didn't mention that it should be on the letterhead of the client, right?
No, sir. I think this question is mainly on why submission to be in letterhead of client when the PO is already given.
Oh, okay.
So I have already, I think, answered in so many words. See, in this dynamic world, even sometimes client is also not aware of what is their fact. Someone is joining very new in client and saying that this is the facts which I have been told, and you are preparing submission on the basis of that fact. So who should take onus? As a CA, we are only representing the client and we are only putting in words what has been stated by client to us. So that risk has to be taken by client, not by the chartered accountant, because we have just applied our mind on the particular case facts, which is client's facts, which client has to provide us. So therefore I said that in such a situation, it is always advisable to take it on client's letterhead. Though POA is CA for representation, POA is not given for preparing written submission. Preparing written submission, there must be arrangement between CA and your client. For that, you don't require POA. POA is required only for representation before the office.
Right. Now, this is the next question is from someone who has got a good feedback on why you've not been drafting effectively. I think he's asking, do we use words in your letter like your good self? Such respect is necessary. I think that's okay.
I mean, I think I already clarified. See, if you give respect, you get respect. So
no,
I don't
after
think
all, you're not respecting the individual, you're respecting the position in which you're communicating to.
correct.
It's not the person, it's the seat and it's the chair that you are responding to. So I think that is worth of the respect.
Correct.
Your view considering section 292B, why not to accept notice? AO has power to even record your statement considering the fact PO is given to you.
This could
little confusing, even I didn't understand. What are your views considering section 292B? Okay, 292B. And why not to accept notice? Why not to accept notice?
So in my slide, I have said that
Mm,
power of attorney is given to you for a specific thing to represent.
mm,
So I
mm,
if there is any notices to be collect on behalf of client, then you should not venture into the shoes of client and collect that notice, because there might not be a power of attorney valid for that. And even otherwise, the correct forum or correct way of doing this is to dispatch that notice to the client. So why I was saying this is because in the act there is a procedure prescribed for everything. How to issue
mm,
notice, how to if client is not available, how to submit this notice to the client's agent and all those things. But if you go and collect this, the benefit of all this procedure is given to you by to the officer. Sometimes we take advantage out of the wherein assessing officer is not following the procedure, we get the entire notice quashed. So in such a situation, keeping that in mind, and also keeping in the mind that power of attorney might not allow you to collect this. You are here to represent client's behalf on a particular assessment here, on a particular facts of the case, not to take notice for any assessment here, and not to sign on behalf of client for any other assessment here. So therefore, I said that you should not venture into the shoes of client. You should restrict
right.
to what is the job given by client to you.
So I think it is a suggestive measure, and it is a standard and a good practice not to accept notice on behalf of the client. I
Correct.
actually the notice should be served, and the dates and all should be captured very effectively, because you never know what way the litigation may go to, and whether you are
Correct.
in correct situation. So I think Nikhil has just advised and suggested that you may not, but of course in the POA we might have the rights to collect the notice, but we should not do it as a standard practice. But of course, it's more like a recommendation, not a mandatory thing. So you can take a call on that. Next question is, can CA plead? There is Rajasthan High Court ruling clearly stating that only lawyers can plead, even at ITET stage. CA can only do authentication function. Oh no. Nikhil, please.
So I don't know which High Court ruling this has been referring in this question, Rajasthan High Court.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
what I can understand, being a CA, you can represent till ITAT and even before the authority for advanced ruling. After High Court, on post High Court, only advocate can represent. As you all may be aware that in past, in 2005 or so, there was new act which was created, National Tax Tribunal, which was in substitution of High Court, and wherein it was framed in such a manner that all the cases of, instead of going to High Court, it will go to NTT, National Tax Tribunal. And in that, it was also said that even CA can represent before that in the entity. Against that, there are stay taken by all the advocates, and that is already pending. As of now, that has not been finalized. But as of today, the law is very clear. You can represent up to the income tax appellate tribunal, including before income tax AAR, and there is no bar for CA to represent before them. However, to give the completeness to the question asked, can CA do the authentication function or can CA plead? So if you are appointing a senior counsel or senior advocate, when I say senior counsel, advocate who has been authenticated by High Court to be a senior advocate or by Supreme Court to be a senior advocate, there is a condition with that. The one condition is that senior advocate cannot represent before the tribunal, High Court, Supreme Court, or any lower authorities in isolation. He has to accompany by a briefing advocate or briefing chartered accountant. So there at that stage, even if suppose senior advocate is arguing before ITAT, a chartered accountant being a briefing chartered accountant can accompany a senior advocate. There need not be an advocate only along with senior advocates. So I think in that phrase, this question has been framed, but CA can represent it till ITAT. There is no bar on that.
All right, super. That's the end of all the questions that we had so far. Any more feedback, any more suggestions that you would have, any more questions that you may have, you may reach out to us. You may reach out to WIRC at wirc@ici.in. You may reach out to Nikhil. Nikhil, if you can share your contact details, maybe your number or your email ID, and people can reach out to you, that will be great. Also, there's a request that if you can share the presentation with us, we'll upload it on the website and everyone can download for their purpose. And if you can share it, please email it to us on wirc@ici.in. And that's it for the day. I think it was a fantastic session. On behalf of, I really thank the entire WIRC team, CA Lalit Bajaj, CA Murtuza Kachwala, Secretary, CA Vishal Doshi, the Vice Chairman, and CA Anand Jakodia, Treasurer, and all the other regional council members who have really worked a lot to ensure that these series are organized effectively. Also, I thank Mishra ji, who's handling the entire logistics for this session, Ravi Arora ji, Subhash and Seema and Vaibhav and Vijay, who have done a great job in organizing the entire webinar. And I thank all the attendees who have taken out time. Today we had a record attendance of around 580, 560 odd people. So I think that goes on to say that yes, we're delivering a lot of value, and let's drive more and more. Tomorrow again we have a very good session on auditing, and what all different aspects can we cover in an audit under this scenario of COVID-19. What are the things that we should take care of? How do we take stock take, and how do we do the inventories and the debtors and XYZ. So we've got a speaker from PwC who would be talking to us tomorrow. So on behalf of WRC and Vikasa, I thank you, Nikhil, for giving us a fantastic session today. And we'll wait for your presentation and draft submissions, some sample submissions that you can share with us. We'll upload it, and we'll share all of you who are interested can please download it from the WIRC website under the student section. Thank you everyone, and have a great time ahead. See you tomorrow. Our tomorrow timings would change from 11 to 2, 11 to 1 instead of 2 to 3:30. We'll be doing it for 2 hours from 11 to 1. All right. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.